Hello and welcome to AEF TV in association with Engerati. We're joined now by Nicky from ERM, and Nicky, we were talking a little bit off air, and we had a few calls to prepare for this interview as well. And you guys specialize in sustainability, and one of my questions I had is, how do we move sustainability away from being just a box that's ticked to something that's actually thought about and core and part of the DNA of projects that are happening out there?
Yeah. And I think it's really important for developers to realise that it isn't purely a tick box exercise, and actually it's really important to manage your environmental and social risks of power sector development. Do it right the first time round and earlier on in the project, and you can really minimise those risks and in some cases even design them out, and that can save you time and cost in the long run.
So let's go into the time and cost element a little bit. What are, because that is always one of those key things about what I call, you know, people call it greenwash or whatever it is. People roll their eyes and say, "Oh God, do I have to do that?" But in my view, there's a lack of understanding of the type of risk that you could potentially incur if you don't do it properly. And could you just bring some of those to life for us?
Yeah, indeed. I guess there's a couple of categories. One might be on the social side. So a lot of developers, perhaps they have been granted a piece of land by the government, and that's all well and good, and then they get into it and they're partway through their project planning, and then when they need to start accessing international financing and you need to demonstrate that that land has been acquired properly, that the users of the land, whether they be living on the land or grazing cattle or rearing crops and stuff like that, that all has to be documented very carefully. So you need to be able to demonstrate to the international lenders that compensation has been appropriate and undertaken in the correct manner, and that doesn't always happen when you've just been given a bit of land.
So is it one of those things where, in your experience, people then go to international lenders and then they get asked these questions and suddenly they go, "Oh, gosh, we need to do this."
Yeah,
so
indeed.
It becomes like an afterthought rather than a part of the process.
Indeed. I think it's sometimes it's too late, and trying to retrospectively gather that information is very, very hard. You've got to do it right first time round. And if you know that you're going to be going for international financing, start thinking about that at the conceptual phase of the project, not when you're much further down the line.
And what are some of the other effects that that could happen if this isn't done properly? I remember in our phone conversation you were saying that things like, look, if you haven't consulted the local community, you could be in very real danger of having your power plant picketed or whatever. So could you just bring some of those up?
Yeah, I think it's important for developers to not underestimate the power and the influence that the communities have. Your social license to operate is vital. And with good stakeholder engagement done right at the beginning of the project, you can really get that support from the community. The last thing you want is to be turning up on their doorstep and you've not got them on board, you've not had them engaged. They could picket the construction. Imagine you've got some villagers protesting and you can't get your kit to site. That could be 6 to 12 months delay, and all of that comes down to money.
And it's another piece as well. It's like, from my point of view, is certainly being at a forum like this, there's this kind of hunger to do business in Africa, but then I always feel that there should be some sort of transference of skills and things like that. And you know, how do you see all of that shaping up in the projects that you guys get involved in, or indeed projects that you see? Are you kind of disappointed about the lack of thought behind how do we transfer skills, how do we move that in?
I think there's a lot of developers who've got the right intentions and the will to do these kind of really good things, but you've got to be careful in terms of how you approach it. You need to be engaging when speaking to communities to really understand what they're looking for. Sometimes we might assume it might be schools or clinics, but perhaps it's a nomadic community who actually aren't interested in things like that. And when it comes to training, speak to the community.
So if I can pick up on that,
Yeah.
so what you're saying is that sometimes things are done assumptively rather than in consultation.
Yes,
so you
indeed.
say, oh, we'll build a school, and you're like,
Yeah, and the intentions are fantastic.
yes.
But actually that might not be what the community really want or really need. In fact, just the other day, one of my colleagues was telling me a story about a project where they were wanting to build a borehole to give a community access to drinking water. But actually the community were quite divided, so the men folk in the community quite liked the idea that the women folk had to walk for a couple of kilometres to gather the water. And actually when we engaged with the women folk of the village, they liked the idea that they could escape from the men. So, what we automatically think is a great idea might not work in that setting.
What a great example. Everybody gets a break from each other, right?
I know. And we might automatically just think, we turn a tap on, so we take it for granted. That's what this community must want. But actually, there's other factors in play, and if you don't engage with the community, you don't get that intelligence, and we can so easily make the wrong choices. And actually, through engaging with the community, we came up with a compromise which worked well, where there was a borehole that was built by the developer. They had better access to water, but it still meant that the two parts of that community did get their space. Instead of it being 10 kilometres away, it was 2 kilometres away.
And that's such a great story. And then kind of diving into the sustainability piece a little bit further. I mean, one of the other things that I'm kind of interested to hear, but we've had people here for the last 2 days, is how do you then, and this is the other part of the equation, how do you then look at sustainability in terms of power and the fuel sources and things like that? I don't know whether you can speak to that, but it seems to me that it would make sense that these projects should have some sort of blended power, so that we should have renewables in association with gas, rather than just sort of monopower.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think we work for clients across the whole range of power sector projects. Hydro, solar, PV, winds, CSP, gas. You name it.
Do you see people coming to you guys and saying, look, actually our project is going to have wind, solar and gas? Are you starting to see that?
Rarely. I think we've got some examples of clients in South Africa where it's a combination of wind and solar.
Right.
I think what we tend to find as well, there's a lot of projects that want to be gas, CCGT, but the supply of gas is a bit uncertain. So they need to maybe start with HFO and then switch to gas. But also I think it depends on the country and where in the country you are. So for instance, in Nigeria, you might say the southern part of Nigeria might be more gas, the middle part of Nigeria maybe hydro, the northern part maybe solar. Blended projects like that don't necessarily always work. But I think just because something is a gas-fired power project doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be the most sustainable.
Right. And one of the other things I was going to ask is we're here at AEF, and you mentioned off air that you guys have been run off your feet over the last 2 days. What are some of the conversations, and there's no need to name names, but if I can just ask you to kind of bring to life some of the conversations where you're like, "Hey, well, that's really interesting. It's great that we're being asked that questions." And the flip of that is, I can't believe we're still being asked this, or I can't believe people are still talking about that.
I think one key theme of what we're finding with a lot of clients and a lot of developers is that they've done the studies and the work to meet the local regulations. So it might be a local EIA, environmental impact assessment, for instance. And then they're going to international funders, and they're coming to us to ask us to upgrade their local EIA to an international standard ESHA, environmental social impact assessment. And that can sometimes be really hard to do. And it's not simply identifying the gaps and then plugging them. Sometimes you have to go all the way back to the beginning, because perhaps the biodiversity surveys or the social surveys weren't done thoroughly or at the right time of year, or perhaps to the right methodology. And
so there's a very real cost associated to it.
Totally.
In terms of because we're not just talking about walking around a room and saying is the plug in the right place. You have to go back on site, into the on the ground, and
you're
get these
essentially repeating some of the work to a better standard for a slightly different audience. And not only is there cost, but there's time associated with that. And that has a dollar sign associated
well,
with it.
again, you kind of mentioned it with the sort of biodiversity or environmental surveys. The time isn't just the time it takes to do it, but you may need to do it in 6 months' time, because people want to know.
Well, and also because of the seasons, wet season and dry season, you might see very different habitats in play. So, it's important to get it right first time round. And there's very simple ways to do that. You can do one set of surveys that's going to feed into 2 different processes, and that shouldn't be underestimated.
So, are you sort of saying, well, in my view, and you're preaching to the choir with me, it's like, do you not think that the idea of sustainability, and again, this is my view, is it needs to move away from just jargon or that's just something we say, to and a real understanding that approaching something with that mindset, that ethos in your head, is actually good business sense as well.
Totally. It is business sense. At the conceptual stage of a project, when a developer's thinking about the technical risks, the regulatory, political risks, think about the environmental and social risks at that stage. And it doesn't take a huge amount of effort to have an environmental and social specialist come down and walk the selected site, or perhaps even help you choose your sites, or even identify the different environmental and social risks associated with the several sites, feeding into that site selection process. That's quite a low investment, but it can really, really help at that critical stage.
And part of that process will also, it kind of makes it easy to engage with the community as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can get a sense at that early stage of how that community might react, what's their appetite for development in their back garden, and that shouldn't be underestimated.
And
knowledge
again,
is power.
Absolutely. And again, coming to the end of our time in the studio, it's amazing how quickly it goes. And you can hear all the noise in the background. So we are at a conference, we are at AEF. If we can just give a nod to that fact, is how have you found it? Have you met some of the right people? Are you encouraged by the conversations you're having, particularly to do with your field as well?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, our stand has been buzzing. We've had lots of people from the lending community and developers come and speak to us, and it's been fantastic. We've had some really, really valuable, insightful conversations, and it's great to see so many developers thinking more about sustainability, and I think if we
and
can
are they
get their
genuinely
mindset,
coming to you now with a mindset that we're actually thinking about this, or is it still a tick box?
I think that's starting to slowly change. I think people are seeing mistakes that other sectors perhaps and
Right.
other developers are making.
Right.
And there are some good examples of where it's gone very wrong.
Right.
And I think they're starting to realise that environmental and social risks are important. It's not a tick box exercise. Get it right the first time round, and you'll have a much swifter, timely, and on budget project.
So they're starting. Not quite there. Room for improvement.
Yes,
is the
indeed,
message.
Indeed,
Okay,
could do better.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nicky.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for watching. It's another interview for AEF TV in association with Engerati. Thanks again.